Mercedes were perfect in qualifying all season, and in just 30 minutes in Miami, that dominance was shattered. One small rule change, one hidden weakness, and one perfect lap from Lando Norris, that's all it took to expose the most powerful team on the grid. A 1 minute, 27.869, faster than both Mercedes, faster than anyone expected, and suddenly, the team that looked unbeatable can't respond. Because this wasn't just a lost pole. This was the moment everyone realized Mercedes can be beaten. Coming into Miami, Mercedes didn't just have an advantage, they had something far more dangerous: control. Every qualifying session in 2026 followed the same script. Different circuits, different layouts, different challenges, same result. They always found that extra time when it mattered most. It wasn't obvious. It never is. Because real dominance in Formula One doesn't look dramatic, it looks smooth, clean, almost effortless. But that's exactly why it's so powerful. Other teams stopped trying to beat Mercedes, and started trying to understand how close they could get. And that shift changes everything. Because the moment your rivals stop believing they can win, you've already won. That was the mindset across the grid before Miami. But underneath that control, there was a hidden dependency. Something very specific that made the entire system work. Energy. Not just power, but how that power is stored, and more importantly, how it is released at the exact moment a driver exits a corner. That's where Mercedes built their dominance. That instant acceleration, that final burst, that extra push that always gave them the edge. And no one could match it. Until something changed. Just before Miami, a small regulation tweak adjusted that exact system. The amount of energy recovery allowed in qualifying was reduced, and the way it regenerates was modified. On paper, it looks insignificant. But in reality, it removes the exact advantage Mercedes depended on. Think of it like a runner who always has one extra step at the end of a sprint. Take that away, and suddenly, the race becomes equal. That's Mercedes now. They didn't become slow. They became reachable. At the same time, McLaren arrived with something completely different. Not just an upgrade, a breakthrough. Norris himself said the car felt completely different between practice and qualifying. They found something that changed everything. And you could see it immediately. First phase of qualifying, medium tires, Norris goes out, and instantly sets the pace. But more importantly, he looks comfortable. No corrections. No hesitation. No fighting the car. And that tells you something critical. The car is working with the driver, not against him. Because in qualifying, comfort creates speed. If the driver trusts the car, they push harder, brake later, carry more speed through every corner. Norris had that. Mercedes, for the first time this season, didn't look like they had something extra in reserve. And that's where the first crack appeared. Not in the final result. In the feeling. Because when a dominant team suddenly looks normal, even for a moment, that's when everything becomes possible. But what almost happened next? Nearly erased Norris from the fight completely. And if that one moment had gone differently, Mercedes might still look unbeatable right now. The second segment is where everything almost collapsed. Up to that point, McLaren looked sharp, in control, ready to challenge for pole. Norris had the pace, the rhythm, the confidence. But qualifying doesn't reward comfort. It punishes it. As the session moved forward, the track gained grip, temperatures shifted, and suddenly the car behaved differently. What felt stable one lap earlier, now felt unpredictable. And Norris found that out instantly. He attacks the second sector chicane, one of the most demanding parts of the circuit. High-speed entry, quick change of direction, no room for hesitation. And then, the rear steps out. Not a small correction. A real moment. The kind that ends sessions. For a fraction of a second, it looks like he's gone. Because in this format, one mistake doesn't cost you time. It can eliminate you completely. He catches it. Barely. But that moment reveals something critical. The McLaren isn't just fast, it's right on the edge. Think of it like walking on a frozen surface. You can move faster than anyone else, but every step carries risk. That was Norris. And while he's fighting to stay in control, Ferrari steps in. Leclerc delivers a clean lap, takes the top spot in that segment, and suddenly the pressure shifts. Hamilton right there as well. Ferrari looks composed. McLaren looks fragile. Mercedes, still present, still consistent, but no longer dominant. And this is where most people misunderstand what happened. They think Norris struggled because of a mistake. But the mistake is only the symptom. The real issue is deeper. The same setup that made McLaren incredibly fast, also made it extremely sensitive. Especially at the start of the lap, when the tires are not fully in the optimal window. Too cold, and the rear becomes unpredictable. That's exactly what triggered that moment in the chicane. So now the story changes. This isn't just about who is fastest. It's about who can control the limit. McLaren had the highest peak performance, but also the highest risk. And Norris was right in the middle of it. At one point, he drops down the order, dangerously close to elimination. Everything comes down to one final lap just to survive. One more mistake, and he's out. No pole. No breakthrough. No exposed weakness for Mercedes. Everything ends right there. But he delivers. And that's what makes what happens next so important. Because the same car that almost lost everything is about to produce the most precise lap of the entire session. And that contrast is the key to understanding everything that followed. Now everything comes down to a single moment. Final segment. One lap. No margin for error. And after what just happened, Norris knows exactly how close he is to losing everything. Because he's already felt the limit. He's already seen how quickly the car can turn against him. So this time, he changes the approach. He doesn't go out trying to be the fastest immediately. He goes out trying to be precise. The out lap becomes critical. Tires need to be in the perfect window. Not too cold, not too hot. Exactly right. It's like trying to sprint with shoes that only work at one exact temperature. Miss it by a little, and the lap is gone. This time, he hits it. And you can feel it from the first corner. No hesitation. No corrections. The car finally responds exactly how he needs it to. First sector, clean. Not aggressive, but controlled. Building confidence with every corner. But the real test is still ahead. Sector 2. The same place where everything almost ended. Same chicane. Same risk. He turns in, and nothing happens. No rear snap. No instability. Just grip. And that tells you everything. The problem was never speed. It was the window. And now, he's inside it. From that moment, the lap transforms. Corner after corner, the car flows. Every input connects perfectly. No wasted movement, no hesitation on throttle. By the time he reaches the final sector, this is no longer about surviving. This is execution. And this is where great laps become untouchable. Because at the end of a qualifying lap, tires are at their absolute peak, but also at their limit. Push too hard, and they fall away instantly. So the driver has to decide. Hold back or commit. Norris commits. Final corners, full confidence, no lift, no doubt. And when he crosses the line? 1 minute, 27.869. For a moment, everything pauses. Because that lap doesn't just look fast. It feels unreachable. Antonelli goes next. Clean lap. Strong execution. Still over 2/10 behind. That's not a mistake. That's the maximum. Piastri follows, right there in third, confirming McLaren's pace is real. And then Russell? He pushes, but the car doesn't respond the same way. 6th place. More than half a second away. And that's the moment it becomes undeniable. Mercedes didn't lose because of an error. They lost because they couldn't go faster. And that changes everything. Because when a dominant team reaches its limit, and someone else is still ahead, that's not a bad session. That's a shift in power. But here's the detail that makes it even more important. That perfect lap from Norris only exists because of what almost went wrong before. Without that moment in the previous segment, without that instability, without that warning, he doesn't adjust. He doesn't find the perfect window. And Mercedes might still be on top, which means this entire collapse came down to understanding the limit just before it breaks. And now Mercedes faces a much bigger problem. Because they're no longer chasing a lap. They're chasing an answer. Inside Mercedes, there was no shouting. No visible panic. But that doesn't mean everything was under control. Because when a team like Mercedes goes quiet, it usually means they've seen something in the data they don't like. And this time, the data was clear. Antonelli delivered a clean lap. No major mistakes, no obvious time left on the table. Just over 2/10 behind Norris. That's not a driver issue. That's the car reaching its absolute limit. And when your best possible performance still isn't enough, that's when the real concern begins. But it gets even more uncomfortable. Because on the other side of the garage, Russell finishes 6th. More than half a second behind. Same car. Same conditions. Completely different result. And that tells you something deeper. The performance is still there, but the window to access it is much smaller. Much harder to find. Think of it like trying to unlock something with a key that has to be perfectly aligned. Even a slight difference, and it doesn't work. Antonelli found that alignment. Russell didn't. And that's a serious problem. Because dominance in Formula One isn't just about peak performance. It's about repeatability. Knowing that both drivers can extract everything, every single session, under pressure. Miami showed the opposite. One driver close to the limit. The other, nowhere near it. And that leads directly to the real issue. The regulation change. That small adjustment in energy recovery, from 8 to 7 megajoules, didn't just reduce performance, it exposed how dependent Mercedes were on that system. Their entire qualifying strength was built around maximizing that extra energy. That final burst out of corners. That instant acceleration that always gave them the edge. Now, that advantage is reduced. And when your concept is built around something that gets reduced, you don't just lose speed. You lose your foundation. That's the real weakness Norris exposed. Not a mistake. Not a bad session. A structural problem. And here's where it becomes even more dangerous. Because while Mercedes is trying to understand what they've lost, the rest of the grid is starting to understand something else. They can beat them. McLaren already proved it. Piastri in third confirms it wasn't a one-off. Ferrari, just behind, shows they're close enough to fight with a clean lap. Red Bull, still adapting, still finds a way into the top 5. Suddenly, this isn't a one-team story anymore. It's a battle. And battles bring pressure. Because now Mercedes isn't protecting a lead. They're defending it. And that changes everything. Drivers push harder. Strategies become more aggressive. Mistakes become more likely. But here's the part that makes this even more uncertain. Mercedes themselves admitted something important. Qualifying was a problem. But the race might be different. And that creates a dangerous split. Because if their race pace is still strong, they can recover. They can still control the bigger picture. But if this weakness carries into race conditions, then Miami wasn't just a bad session. It was the moment everything changed. So now the real question isn't whether Norris exposed their weakness. That already happened. The real question is, can Mercedes fix it before everyone else takes advantage of it?